Let me tell you something, life doesn't fall apart in one big crash. Cracks in places you don't notice. It starts with a strange look, an unanswered question, a slip of a smile meant for someone else. You see it, but you don't want to believe it. You convince yourself it's nothing because the alternative? It's a nightmare you're not ready for. This story starts 2 weeks ago. Emily, my wife, was supposed to be out of town for a work trip, a 3-day marketing conference in Chicago. She made a big deal about packing, talking about her presentations, her clients, the usual. It all seemed routine. But here's the thing, I ran into her that night. In our own city. In a place she had no business being. I wasn't supposed to be there either. I'd wrapped up a late meeting with a client downtown and decided to grab a drink at a hotel bar. Just one whiskey to unwind before heading home. The lobby was dimly lit, filled with that low hum of business conversations, laughter, and clinking glasses. I wasn't paying attention to anyone until I saw her. At first, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. But there she was, Emily, sitting in the corner booth, leaning in close to a man I recognized instantly. Matthew Stone. You know the name. Big shot businessman. His face is all over the news, usually grinning in front of some luxury investment or shaking hands with politicians. Emily wasn't dressed like she was at a work event. No conference badge. No presentation materials. Just a sleek black dress, the kind she usually saved for special occasions. Her hand was resting on his arm, and they were deep in conversation. Too deep. It wasn't business. It was personal. My heart started pounding, but I forced myself to stay calm. Maybe it was work. Maybe I was reading too much into it. I stayed in my seat, watching, waiting. Then, something happened that made my blood run cold. Matthew leaned over and whispered something in her ear. She laughed. That soft, familiar laugh I'd heard 1,000 times. Then she grabbed his hand and led him out of the bar. I didn't think. I just acted. I followed them. They took the elevator up to the executive floor, and I slipped into the next one, punching the same number. My heart was in my throat the whole ride up. I had no plan, no idea what I'd do if I caught them. When the doors opened, I stepped out into the quiet hallway. I could hear their voices down the hall. Her laugh again, his low murmur. They disappeared into one of the suites. I stood there for what felt like hours. My mind was racing. Should I knock? Should I barge in? Should I walk away? But before I could decide, the door opened. Emily came out alone, adjusting her dress. She didn't see me at first. She was on her phone, texting, her face glowing in the hallway light. When she finally looked up, her expression froze. "Mark," she said, her voice shaky. What are you doing here?" I took a step toward her. "I think the better question is, what the hell are you doing here?" She stammered something about a client meeting, but we both knew that was a lie. And that's when I heard it. A voice from inside the suite. Matthew's voice. "Everything okay? Babe? Babe?" Emily's face turned white. She opened her mouth to explain, but there was nothing she could say that would make this right. I took one last look at her, then turned and walked away. I didn't even wait for the elevator. I took the stairs, my footsteps echoing in the empty stairwell. My wife, the woman I thought I knew, was cheating on me. Not with some random guy. Not with someone who could be dismissed as a mistake. She was sleeping with Matthew Stone. A man who could ruin everything. I didn't sleep that night. I went home, sat on the couch, and just stared at the wall. My mind was spinning. I kept replaying that scene in the hotel hallway. Emily standing there, caught in the act and still trying to lie her way out of it. "What the hell are you doing here?" She asked me that like I was the one doing something wrong. Like I was the one sneaking around behind her back. That's what made my blood boil. She wasn't sorry. She wasn't scared. She was pissed that I showed up and ruined her little secret. Around 3 a.m., my phone buzzed. Emily, calling for the 10th time. I ignored it. Then, a text. "Mark, we need to talk. Please." Talk? There was nothing to talk about. I'd seen enough. But, of course, she didn't stop. By the time morning came, she was pounding on the front door. I thought about ignoring her again, but I knew Emily well enough to know she wouldn't leave. She's stubborn. And loud. The neighbors didn't need to hear this mess. So I opened the door. There she stood, looking like a complete disaster. Her hair was a mess, makeup smudged, her usual polished appearance totally gone. She wasn't the composed, perfect version of herself that the world saw. This was the raw, unfiltered Emily, panicked, desperate, and, most of all, manipulative. "Mark," she started, her voice breaking. "I know what you think you saw, but it's not what it looks like." I crossed my arms and leaned against the doorframe. "Really? Because it looked like you were sneaking out of a hotel suite with Matthew Stone. So, what exactly did I misunderstand?" She opened her mouth, then closed it again. For once, she had no quick excuse ready. "Come inside," she said softly. "Let's talk. Please." I let her in, not because I wanted to hear her lies, but because I wanted to see just how far she'd go to cover this up. She walked into the living room and sat on the couch. For a moment, it felt surreal, like we were just two people having a normal morning. Except my wife was sitting there after spending the night with another man, and I could still hear his voice in my head. "Everything okay, babe?" Emily took a deep breath. "Mark, Matthew is a client. You know that. I've been working with him for months." I stayed silent. We were meeting to discuss a new campaign. It was late, and the hotel was convenient. That's all. I swear. Convenient? She really expected me to buy that? I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. "So, let me get this straight. You had a late-night business meeting with Matthew Stone in his hotel room, and he called you babe." Her eyes darted away. "He didn't mean it like that." "Oh, really? How did he mean it, Emily?" "Because it sure as hell sounded like he wasn't talking to his PR consultant." She stood up, pacing the room. "Okay, fine. Maybe it was inappropriate. But nothing happened, Mark. You have to believe me." And that's when I snapped. I stood up and closed the distance between us. "I followed you, Emily. I saw you walk into that suite. I saw you come out, fixing your dress. I heard him call you babe. And you're standing here, still trying to lie to my face." She froze. Her eyes widened for just a second before narrowing again, like she was recalculating her approach. "You were following me?" she hissed. "Do you have any idea how crazy that sounds? What kind of husband spies on his wife?" And just like that, she flipped the narrative. Classic Emily. I laughed bitterly. "You're unbelievable. You get caught cheating, and now I'm the bad guy for catching you." She threw her hands in the air. "I told you. Nothing happened. You're making this bigger than it is. I've been under so much pressure lately. You don't understand what it's like to keep clients like Matthew happy. Apparently, it's exhausting." I shot back. "Must be hard work, keeping him happy." Her face hardened. "You don't get it. You never have." And there it was. The shift. She wasn't going to apologize. She wasn't going to beg for forgiveness. Instead, she was going to make this about me. Twist the blame until I was questioning my own sanity. "Do you know why I work so hard?" she continued. "To keep us afloat. You've been so focused on your own job, your own life. You don't even see what I go through. Do you ever ask how I'm doing? Do you ever thank me for what I do?" I shook my head. "Wow. So, this is my fault now." Her voice dropped, turning icy. "I'm not saying that. But maybe if you paid a little more attention, we wouldn't be here." I stared at her, feeling something shift inside me. The woman I married wasn't standing in front of me anymore. This version of Emily was cold, calculating, and dangerous. "You're right," I said quietly. "We wouldn't be here. Because if I'd been paying attention sooner, I would have seen what you really are." Her jaw clenched. "And what's that supposed to mean?" "It means," I said, stepping back toward the door, "you've been lying for a long time, Emily, and I'm done pretending I don't see it." I opened the door. "Get out." Her eyes flashed with something. Anger, fear, maybe both. "Mark, don't do this. We can fix it." I shook my head. "There's nothing to fix. Not anymore." For a moment I thought she'd fight harder. But instead, she grabbed her bag, straightened her shoulders, and walked out without another word. As the door closed behind her, I realized two things. First, this wasn't over. And second, I wasn't ready for what was coming next. I thought that would be the end of it. I thought Emily would leave, cool off for a day or two, and come crawling back with some carefully crafted apology. That's what she always did. She'd turn on the tears, play the victim, and somehow convince me that I was the unreasonable one. But this time felt different. After she walked out, I sat there, replaying every lie, every excuse, every weird moment that suddenly made sense. The late nights, the work events, the phone calls she'd take in the other room. It wasn't paranoia. It was real. And yet, despite everything, part of me still wanted to believe she hadn't gone that far. That maybe, somehow, her affair with Matthew Stone hadn't crossed the line into something physical. That maybe it was just flirting, emotional. But not that. I was wrong. 2 days later, I found out exactly how deep her betrayal went. And it wasn't from her. It was from my buddy, Jake. Jake works security for an upscale department store downtown. It's one of those places where rich people go to waste money on designer clothes and overpriced nonsense. He's seen it all, celebrities, politicians, and yes, even Matthew Stone. That's how he recognized Emily. It was around noon when Jake called me. I was at work, trying to pretend my life wasn't falling apart, when my phone buzzed. "Hey man, you got a minute?" Jake sounded uneasy. "Yeah, what's up?" There was a long pause. "I wasn't sure if I should tell you this, but I figured you'd want to know." "Tell me what?" "I saw Emily." My stomach tightened. "Where?" "At the store. With someone." He hesitated. "With Matthew Stone." I felt my grip tighten around the phone. "When?" "Yesterday. They came in together. Real cozy. You know the type, walking close, laughing at everything the other one says. She was all over him, man." I clenched my jaw. "Did you talk to her?" "No. But, Mark, there's more." "What more?" Jake sighed. "They went into one of the private dressing rooms." My heart stopped. "Together?" I managed to ask. "Yeah. And they were in there for a while." I didn't say anything. Couldn't. "I didn't think it was my place to get involved," Jake continued. "But, man, I heard her." "What do you mean?" "I heard her, Mark. Her voice. Her moans." My blood turned to ice. Jake's voice dropped. "I'm sorry, man. I wish I didn't have to tell you that." I hung up without saying goodbye. That night, I sat alone in our living room, staring at the wedding photo on the mantel. It was one of those candid shots. Emily laughing, me looking at her like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. What a joke. I couldn't sit still. I grabbed my keys and drove downtown, straight to the department store. Jake was waiting for me at the security desk. He looked at me with that awkward sympathy people give when they don't know what to say. "I pulled the footage," he said quietly. "You don't have to watch it." "I do." He led me to the back office, where a monitor was already queued up. "There," he said, pointing to the screen. I saw her immediately. Emily. She looked radiant, confident, carefree, like she didn't have a single worry in the world. She wasn't the Emily I knew. She was someone else entirely. Matthew was with her, his hand resting on the small of her back as they walked through the store. They stopped at a rack of dresses. She picked one out, something sleek and red, and held it up to her body. He nodded, smiling. Then they disappeared into the dressing room. The timestamp on the footage showed they were inside for 25 minutes. 25 minutes. Jake turned to me, his expression grim. "You sure you want to keep watching?" I nodded. When the door finally opened, Emily came out first, smoothing down her dress, her face flushed. Matthew followed, adjusting his shirt cuffs like he hadn't just been fooling around in a public place. They walked out of the store together, laughing. I sat back, numb. "Mark, I'm sorry," Jake said again. "I thought you should know." I nodded, my voice barely a whisper. "Thanks." As I walked out of the store, one thought kept echoing in my head. She wasn't even trying to hide it. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a moment of weakness. Emily made a choice. And now it was my turn to make one. I barely remember the drive home. My hands were gripping the wheel so hard. My knuckles turned white. Every red light felt like a personal insult. Every honk from a passing car made my blood boil. My head was a mess of images. Emily in that dressing room, her smug little smile, her hands on Matthew's chest. And then that sound. Jake's words wouldn't leave my mind. I heard her moans. It wasn't just an affair. It was reckless, shameless. She wasn't hiding. She was out there, flaunting it like she couldn't care less if anyone saw. Like our marriage meant nothing to her. By the time I got home, I knew exactly what I had to do. Emily needed to know that I knew everything. I didn't text her. I didn't call. I wanted to see her face when the walls closed in. I wanted to watch her squirm, watch that mask of hers crack. Around 8 p.m., she walked through the door, like nothing had happened. She was dressed in her usual work mode outfit, a fitted blazer, high heels, hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail. She looked like a woman who had her life completely together. It made me sick to look at her. "Hey," she said casually, dropping her bag by the door. "What's for dinner?" "Dinner?" I stared at her, incredulous. "Dinner?" That's when she noticed my expression. Her smile faltered. "What's wrong?" I didn't answer. I stood up slowly, locking eyes with her. "How was Chicago?" Her face froze for half a second, just a flicker of panic before she recovered. "It was good," she said quickly. "Long though. I'm exhausted." She started walking toward the kitchen, clearly trying to avoid the conversation. "I'm going to pour some wine. Want a glass?" I followed her. "Funny. Jake said he saw you downtown yesterday." She stopped dead in her tracks. The wine bottle in her hand hovered midair. "What?" "Yeah. Jake works security at Harper's. You remember Harper's, right? The store where you and Matthew Stone decided to spend some time together." Her hand trembled slightly as she set the bottle down. "Mark, it's not what you think." I let out a sharp laugh. "You've said that before. It didn't work then, and it sure as hell isn't working now." She turned to face me, her expression shifting into something defensive. "I don't know what Jake told you, but—" "Oh, I know exactly what happened," I interrupted. "He told me about the dressing room, how you were in there for 25 minutes, how he heard you." Her face turned pale. "Yeah, that's right," I said, my voice low. "He heard you, Emily. He heard everything." For a moment, there was complete silence between us. Then she snapped. "Are you seriously spying on me now? You're taking the word of some security guard over your own wife." I stepped closer. "Stop. Stop flipping this around. You don't get to play the victim here. I'm not interested in your manipulations. Just tell me the truth." Her eyes darted around the room, searching for a way out. "Mark, you're blowing this out of proportion. Matthew is a client." "A client?" I barked. "Really? Do you let all your clients call you babe? Do you spend quality time with them in dressing rooms?" Her lips pressed into a thin line. I could see the gears turning in her head, trying to come up with some new lie. But I wasn't going to let her. "You're cheating on me, Emily," I said quietly. "Just admit it." Her shoulders slumped. For a brief moment, I thought I saw guilt in her eyes, maybe even regret. But then, as quickly as it came, it was gone, replaced by something colder. "So what if I am?" she said, her voice hard. I blinked, stunned. "You're not perfect, Mark," she continued. "You've been distant. You don't listen. You don't pay attention to me. You think this marriage has been great? It hasn't. I needed more. More," I repeated, my voice shaking with anger. "You needed more, so you decided to screw around with a billionaire in public dressing rooms? That's your solution?" She crossed her arms. "I didn't plan for it to happen, but it did. And honestly, I don't regret it." That hit me like a punch to the gut. "You don't regret it?" She shook her head. "No. Matthew treats me like I matter. Like I'm more than just someone to come home to after work." "And what am I, Emily?" I asked, my voice trembling. "What have I been to you all these years?" She looked at me with that same cold expression. "Convenient." I felt the ground shift beneath me. The woman standing in front of me wasn't the woman I thought I married. She was a stranger. "You've got some nerve," I whispered. "I've loved you, supported you, and this is what I get." "Love?" She shot back, her voice rising. "You barely notice me anymore. You're married to your job, Mark. Don't act like you've been the perfect husband." I shook my head, laughing bitterly. "So this is my fault? You cheat, and somehow it's my fault." She didn't answer. Instead, she grabbed her bag and headed toward the door. "Where are you going?" I called after her. "To clear my head," she said without looking back. "Don't wait up." And just like that, she was gone. I stood there, in the silence of our house, realizing something that sent a chill down my spine. Emily wasn't sorry. She wasn't ashamed. She was done pretending. I didn't move for a long time after Emily left. I just stood there, staring at the door, replaying her words over and over. I don't regret it. Matthew treats me like I matter. Convenient. I kept waiting for the shock to wear off, for my brain to process what had just happened. But the anger came first. Hot, burning anger. I grabbed my phone, opened her text thread, and scrolled through all her messages from the past few months. Suddenly, every working late excuse, every sorry, I'll be home late text had a new meaning. She wasn't working. She was with him. I felt like a fool. But something kept nagging at me. A sick, twisted curiosity. I knew what I had to do, even if it made me hate myself. I needed to see it for myself. The next morning, I took a personal day from work. I wasn't in the mood to pretend like everything was fine. Instead, I drove to Matthew Stone's office building. It wasn't hard to figure out where he worked. His company's logo was plastered all over the city. The man was a walking brand, constantly in the spotlight. I parked across the street and waited. It didn't take long. Around 11 a.m., I saw him. Matthew Stone. Tall, charismatic, and too damn polished for his own good. He stepped out of the building, talking on his phone, exuding the kind of confidence that makes people like him untouchable. A few minutes later, Emily walked out of the same building. She wasn't supposed to be there. She told me she had back-to-back meetings all day. But there she was, laughing at something Matthew said as they walked down the sidewalk together. I clenched the steering wheel so hard I thought it might snap. They stopped at a cafe on the corner, sat outside, ordered drinks. It looked like a scene from a goddamn rom-com. And then, Matthew leaned over the table and kissed her. Right there, in broad daylight. Emily kissed him back without hesitation. No shame, no guilt. Just two people who couldn't care less about the wreckage they were leaving behind. I felt sick, but I wasn't done. That evening, Emily came home as if nothing had happened. She walked in, kicked off her heels, and sighed like she'd had a long day. Hey, she said casually. How was your day? My blood boiled. How was my day? I stayed quiet, watching her as she walked to the kitchen and poured herself a glass of wine. She was humming to herself. Humming. Anything exciting happen at work? She asked, taking a sip. I stood up slowly and walked toward her. Not really. You? She glanced at me over the rim of her glass. Same old. Meetings, clients, emails. She lied so effortlessly. I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms. I drove downtown today. She froze for a split second before setting the glass down. Oh, yeah. Went by Matthew's office. Her face didn't change, but I saw the tension in her shoulders. Why? I don't know, I said, my voice calm. I guess I was curious. You've mentioned him so much lately. I thought I'd see what all the fuss is about. She turned around, pretending to check something in the fridge. Mark, I don't know what you're getting at, but I saw you. The fridge door slammed shut. She turned to face me, her expression blank. Saw me where? At the cafe, I said. With him. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. For once, she had nothing to say. I saw you kiss him, I continued. Right there on the sidewalk. In front of everyone. Her eyes darted away, and for a moment, I thought I'd finally broken through her defenses. But then, she did what she always does. She flipped the narrative. You were following me? I laughed, shaking my head. You can drop the shocked act, Emily. It's not working. She folded her arms across her chest. This isn't healthy, Mark. You're acting paranoid. Paranoid, I repeated. I saw you, Emily. I saw everything. She sighed, like she was tired of the conversation. Okay, fine. Yes. I met Matthew for coffee. It was just a friendly thing. I slammed my hand on the counter, making her jump. Stop lying. She stared at me, wide-eyed, and for a second, I saw something flicker across her face. Fear? Guilt? No, it wasn't either of those. It was annoyance, like I was an inconvenience. What do you want me to say, Mark? She snapped. Do you want me to admit it? Fine. Yes. I kissed him. Yes, we've been spending time together. But it's not what you think. Really? I said, my voice dangerously calm. Because what I think is that you've been screwing him behind my back. In dressing rooms. In hotels. In cafes. She rolled her eyes. God, you're so dramatic. Dramatic. I took a step closer. You've been lying to me for months, Emily. How am I supposed to feel? She sighed again, running a hand through her hair. I didn't plan for this to happen. It just did. Bullshit. It's complicated. No, it's not. I stared her down. You made a choice. You chose him. For the first time, her mask slipped. Her voice softened, almost pleading. I didn't mean to hurt you. I shook my head, laughing bitterly. You don't care about hurting me. You're just mad you got caught. Silence fell between us. Then, she said something that knocked the air out of me. I think we both know this marriage hasn't been working for a long time. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. So, that's it, I whispered. You're just done? She shrugged, her expression cold again. Maybe we both need something different. Different. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You've already replaced me, I said quietly. Haven't you? She didn't deny it. Instead, she picked up her glass of wine, took a sip and said, I think it's time we stopped pretending. The room spun. My hands trembled. Emily didn't just betray me. She was erasing me. And she didn't even care that I stood there, watching her sip that damn wine, acting like she had everything under control. Like she'd just made a clean, logical decision to end our marriage. As if we were negotiating a business deal and I was the piece that no longer fit her strategy. We need something different? I repeated, my voice cold. That's what you think this is? You're bored. So you screw the first billionaire who gives you attention. She didn't even flinch. She tilted her head, gave me that look. The one that says you're overreacting. The one I used to fall for. But not this time. You know what's funny? I said, pacing the room. You keep saying you didn't plan this. That it just happened. But I've been thinking. Affairs like yours don't just happen. I stopped and stared at her. They take work. You've been planning, lying, sneaking around. How many nights did you spend with him, Emily? How many times did you look me in the eye and lie through your teeth? Her face hardened. I'm not going to sit here and be interrogated like some criminal. Criminal? I laughed bitterly. You're right. That's not what you are. You're worse. You're a coward. Her eyes narrowed. A coward? Yeah, a coward, I said, stepping closer. You didn't have the guts to tell me you were done. Instead, you ran to Matthew like a damn parasite, feeding off his money, his influence, because you're too weak to stand on your own. That hit a nerve. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and for the first time, I saw a crack in her composure. You think this is all about money? She hissed. You really think I'm that shallow? Yeah, I do. Because if it wasn't about the money, you wouldn't be crawling around dressing rooms with him. She took a step toward me, her voice rising. You don't know what it's been like, Mark. You don't know how it feels to be invisible in your own marriage. To be a goddamn afterthought. Invisible, I barked. You're unbelievable. I've been here every day, supporting you, trusting you. And you threw it all away. For what? A man who can buy you shiny things? Don't talk to me about feeling invisible. You're the one who disappeared the moment things got tough. Her jaw clenched. Maybe if you paid more attention, I wouldn't have had to look elsewhere. There it was. The blame. The classic cheater's excuse. It's your fault I cheated. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. So, this is my fault? You're actually standing there, blaming me for your affair. She crossed her arms, defiant. You're not perfect, Mark. You've been distant, wrapped up in your work. You don't listen to me anymore. I couldn't help but laugh. You're unbelievable. You cheat on me, and now you're the victim. Her voice softened, turning cold and calculated. I'm not saying I'm perfect, but neither are you. And maybe it's time we both admit that this marriage has been broken for a long time. I stared at her, trying to find even a shred of the woman I once loved. But she wasn't there. The Emily standing in front of me wasn't my wife. She was a stranger. I don't know what's more disgusting, I said quietly. The fact that you cheated, or the fact that you don't even feel guilty. She picked up her wine glass again, took another sip, and smirked. Smirked. You're making this so dramatic, she said. Honestly, Mark, I think you're more upset about the fact that it's Matthew Stone. What, does your ego hurt? You can't stand the fact that I chose someone more successful than you. That was it. I took a step forward, my voice deadly calm. This isn't about my ego. It's about respect. Something you clearly don't have. She rolled her eyes. Respect? You think you've been respectful? You've ignored me for years, Mark. You've treated me like I'm just part of the furniture. Don't. My voice was low, steady. Don't you dare rewrite history to justify what you did. I've been there for you through everything. I've stood by you when you've failed, when you've cried, when you've doubted yourself. And this is how you repay me. Her expression flickered. Guilt, maybe? Or was it annoyance again? I couldn't tell anymore. You really think you're the victim here? She said softly. You're acting like you're perfect, like you haven't made mistakes. I stepped even closer, now face to face with her. The difference, Emily, is that I never betrayed you. I never walked out on us. I never chose someone else over you. She stared back at me, silent. I waited for an apology, for anything. But instead, she reached into her bag, pulled out her phone, and checked her messages. Like this conversation was over. Like I was over. So, that's it? I asked. You're not even going to apologize? She looked up from her phone, shrugged, and said the coldest thing I've ever heard in my life. I've already moved on, Mark. Maybe you should too. The room spun. My chest felt tight. You've moved on, I whispered. Just like that. She put her phone back in her bag and grabbed her coat. This isn't healthy for either of us. I'll stay with a friend tonight. We'll talk when you've calmed down. And then she walked out, without looking back, without saying goodbye. I stood there, staring at the closed door, every part of me screaming to run after her, to keep fighting. But I didn't, because for the first time in 6 years, I realized something. Emily wasn't my wife anymore. She hadn't been for a long time that I didn't hear from Emily for 2 days. 2 days of silence. 2 days of pacing the house, staring at our photos, wondering how the hell I got here. My wife was gone. The woman I thought I knew, the life we built together. All of it felt like a joke now. Every memory was tainted. Every laugh, every kiss, every promise. It wasn't grief I felt anymore. It was rage. I wasn't just angry at her. I was angry at myself for letting this happen, for ignoring the signs, for making excuses for her. But most of all, I was angry because she wasn't sorry. There was no remorse, no guilt. And that's when I decided I was done being the victim. On the 3rd day, Emily finally texted me. We need to talk. I'll be by later. No apology. No explanation. Just a cold, clinical message like we were business partners negotiating a contract. Fine. She wanted to talk? I was ready. But this time, I wasn't going to sit there like a broken man, begging for answers. I was going to fight back. When she walked through the door, I noticed 2 things immediately. First, she looked calm. Too calm. Like someone who had already rehearsed this conversation in her head. Second, she wasn't wearing her wedding ring. That hit harder than I expected. So, she said, setting her bag down, are you ready to talk like adults? I didn't answer right away. I just stared at her. This woman who once told me she'd love me forever. The woman who vowed to stay by my side no matter what. Now she looked at me like I was nothing more than a loose end she needed to tie up. I'm ready, I said, my voice cold. Are you? She sighed, as if this was exhausting for her. Mark, I'm not here to fight. I'm here to be honest. I think we both know this marriage hasn't been working for a long time. Right? I said. And instead of talking to me about it, you decided to screw Matthew Stone. Her eyes flickered, but she stayed composed. I told you it wasn't planned. It just happened. I shook my head, laughing bitterly. You keep saying that, like you tripped and fell into his bed. She rolled her eyes. Do we really have to do this again? You've been distant, Mark. You've been focused on your job, your routine, everything except me. There it is again, I said, stepping closer. Blaming me, like you're the victim, like cheating was your only option. She crossed her arms. I'm not blaming you. I'm telling you why things fell apart. No, you're justifying your betrayal. Pointed at her. You want to rewrite the story so you don't have to feel guilty. Her voice hardened. I don't need to feel guilty. I made a choice, Mark. And you need to accept that. I stepped even closer. You made a choice? Fine. So did I. She frowned. What are you talking about? I pulled out my phone and opened the photos I'd taken from the security footage at the department store. Screenshots of her and Matthew in the dressing room hallway. The kiss. The hand on her waist. I held the phone up so she could see. Her face went pale. You've been reckless, Emily, I said quietly. You thought you could get away with it. You thought I'd never find out. Her jaw tightened. You've been spying on me? No, I said. You were sloppy. You got caught. She stared at the photos for a long moment, her eyes darting between the screen and my face. Then, she took a step back and smiled. Smiled. Wow, she said, shaking her head. I should have known you'd do something like this. You've always been controlling. I blinked. Controlling. She pointed at the phone. This? Following me? Taking photos? That's not love, Mark. That's obsession. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was turning it around on me again, trying to make me the villain. Stop deflecting, I snapped. You cheated. You lied. And now, you're trying to make me feel like the crazy one. She shrugged. If the shoe fits. I clenched my fists, trying to keep my composure. You really don't feel anything, do you? No guilt. No shame. Nothing. She looked me dead in the eye. Why should I? We're done, Mark. We've been done for a long time. I just had the guts to admit it first. The audacity of her words stunned me. You had the guts? I said, my voice rising. No, Emily. You didn't have guts. You had secrets. You didn't end this marriage. You sabotaged it. She shrugged again, completely unfazed. Call it whatever you want, but I'm not going to apologize for finding happiness. Happiness, I repeated, laughing bitterly. With him? With Matthew Stone? Yes, she said without hesitation. He makes me feel alive. Something you haven't done in years. Those words cut deeper than any knife. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. Do you love him? I asked. Her silence was deafening. She didn't say yes, but she didn't say no either. I see, I said quietly. Well, I hope he's worth it. She grabbed her bag and headed for the door. Where are you going? I asked. To pack my things, she said without looking back. I'll be out by the weekend. And just like that, she walked out. I stood there, staring at the empty space she left behind, feeling the weight of her betrayal settle over me. But as the door closed, I made a decision. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Emily thought she'd won. She walked out of our house that night like she held all the cards, like she could just walk into a new life with Matthew Stone, leaving me to pick up the pieces. But I wasn't broken. Not anymore. Something inside me had shifted. The pain was still there, sure, the humiliation, the anger. But underneath it was something else. Clarity. Emily had played me for a fool for months. She lied, cheated, manipulated. And now she thought she could walk away scot-free? Not a chance. The next morning, I made my move. I started with my lawyer. I wasn't going to wait for her to file for divorce. I wanted to be the one in control. The paperwork was drawn up fast. I wasn't messing around with a long, drawn-out process. Then I reached out to a journalist I knew, a guy named Tyler who thrived on exposing the secrets of the rich and powerful. He owed me a favor, and I knew he'd be interested in what I had to offer. The affair wasn't just personal. It was scandalous. Matthew Stone wasn't just any businessman, he was married to Vanessa Stone, a woman known for her ruthless control over their empire. I wasn't the only one being betrayed. 2 days later, the headline dropped. Billionaire Matthew Stone caught in cheating scandal. Secret affair with PR consultant exposed. The article was brutal. Photos from the dressing room incident. Screenshots of Emily and Matthew at the cafe. Details about their affair, everything I had shared with Tyler. It went viral within hours. I sat back and watched the fallout unfold like a chess game, knowing exactly how each piece would fall. Matthew's empire? Shaken. Vanessa Stone? Furious. Emily? Humiliated. Good. Emily showed up at my door that night. This time, there was no calm, no composure. She looked like a wreck, hair disheveled, eyes wide with panic. "Mark," she said, her voice shaking. "What the hell did you do?" I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "What I had to. You ruined my life," she shouted, stepping closer. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Matthew's wife is coming after me. The press won't stop calling. My career is over." I smiled coldly. "You're surprised? What did you think was going to happen, Emily? That you could keep lying and cheating and no one would ever know?" Her eyes burned with anger. "You're a vindictive bastard." "Maybe," I said, my voice calm, "but I'm not a doormat. Not anymore." She paced the porch, running her hands through her hair. "I made a mistake, Mark. I messed up. But this is cruel." I stepped toward her, closing the distance. "Cruel? You want to talk about cruel? How about hearing your wife moaning in a dressing room with another man? How about being lied to, gaslit, made to feel like you're the crazy one?" She opened her mouth to argue, but I cut her off. "You didn't just cheat on me, Emily. You erased me. You acted like I didn't exist, like our marriage didn't matter. So don't stand there and talk to me about cruelty." Her face crumpled for a second, but then, just like always, she pulled herself back together. "What do you want from me?" she asked quietly. "An apology? Fine. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I hurt you. I'm sorry I lied. But you need to move on, Mark. Move on," I repeated, laughing bitterly. "That's rich coming from you. You moved on months ago. You just forgot to tell me." She stared at me, her expression unreadable. "So what now? You've made your point. You've destroyed my reputation. What more do you want?" I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "I don't want anything from you, Emily. I just want you to know one thing." Her eyes narrowed. "What?" I leaned in, my voice low. "I loved you. I gave you everything. And you threw it away for a man who won't even look at you now that the truth is out." She flinched at that. "Matthew's done with you," I said. "Vanessa will make sure of it. And when the dust settles, you'll realize something." "What's that?" she whispered. "That you've lost the one person who would have stood by you through anything." For a moment, I thought I saw regret in her eyes, but it didn't matter anymore. "Goodbye, Emily." I stepped back and closed the door in her face. Later that night, I poured myself a drink and sat by the window, watching the city lights. For the first time in weeks, I felt free. It wasn't the ending I expected. It wasn't the life I thought I'd have. But it was mine again, and that was enough.